This is Classic Business with Michael Avery on Classic 1027 in Johannesburg and Fine Music Radio in Cape Town.
It's Friday. That means it's time for your view from the C-suite here on Classic Business, bringing you closer to South Africa's business leaders and shapers and movers, just to find out what keeps them up at night, what drives them, what motivates them to keep going, certainly in such a tough economic environment. Well, my next guest is certainly no stranger to the pension fund industry and certainly into the region as a whole. He's vast experience in pension fund management, currently serves on the board of various retirement funds as an independent trustee and principal officer. He was vice president of the Institute of Retirement Funds of Southern Africa, where he was also a member of the IRF Executive Committee, responsible for the oversight of the IRF's trustee and education. Very, very important for anyone who listens to the show all the time. They'll know Dave Crawford is always banging on about education in the retirement fund. He's also a founding member of the trustee committee and quite passionately involved in the empowerment of trustees as well. He's Bashka Lachman, Vice President of the Institute of Retirement Funds. Welcome, Bashka. Great to have you on The View.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. And ex-Vice President.
Oh, sorry, ex-Vice President, as I said earlier on. Now, the pension space is about as fascinating as it is fraught. You deal with people's lives, with their savings, their hopes and dreams and aspirations. And the industry has also been found woefully wanting in the past. Various pension funds adjudicators have found issues with fees, early termination penalties. A lot of that is now through the system and through the wash, thankfully. But really, it's an industry that has undergone massive transformation over the last few decades, from defined benefit to defined contribution. We've got the draft default, so there's lots to talk about and lots that keeps you awake at night, I'm sure. But I want to find out from the very beginning, what set you on this path into the retirement funds industry? Where are you from?
I'm born and bred in this great city of Johannesburg. My career aspiration was to go into education. So I enrolled at Wits to do a BA Ed, couldn't make it, had to get married early, and then did some teaching. But cut a long story short, I started my career in this industry at Afrox as a pensions clerk, and then moved on to Old Mutual. And that's where my career just started.
Interesting. I was chatting to Mteto Nyati the other day after his book Betting on a Darkie, and he also started out at Afrox in his formative years.
I didn't know that.
At which time were you at Afrox? When was that?
Oh gosh, that is 1983.
So dialing it back a few years.
Yeah, Selby head office.
Yeah, and he also found that at that time, we're talking now, it is still in the heart of apartheid, and empowerment hadn't even really been considered as a concept, but there were forward-thinking firms, and Afrox was, he mentioned, one of those at least. What set you there from Afrox onto the path of becoming an expert in the field of retirement funds?
Okay, firstly, apartheid didn't have a heart. But anyway, so yeah, I needed to get, improve my salary, my earnings, and an opportunity came up at Old Mutual. I applied. And in fact, at the time, I had two opportunities. One was Old Mutual Employee Benefits and Fetchware, which existed then.
Yes.
And with my late dad's advice, I chose Old Mutual. But it wasn't to develop a career in employee benefits retirement funds. It was just to sort of see if I can improve my salary. And I started enjoying working there. And at that time, Old Mutual was also very visionary, in the sense that I think they realized that they needed to start developing people of color. And, from year to year, I got a promotion every year, worked extra hard. We, in those days, Michael, had to work harder, maybe 100 times harder than our white counterparts, which we did.
It's exactly what Mteto said, because you, in a system that deprived you of your humanity, had to almost prove that you belonged, which is abhorrent to those people who didn't grow up in that system. Sure. But we need to remember that was the reality at that time.
Absolutely.
From there, you in Old Mutual, you're finding that apart from the salary and the moving up the corporate ladder, you're actually quite enjoying what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely.
What is it about employee benefits and retirement that really appealed to you and your heart as an educator?
Thank you. I mean, your introduction was great. I compliment you for your introduction. So, yes, I mean, at the end of the day, I was blessed to have many, many people who taught me a lot. And in those days, we started at the bottom and developed, admin and so forth and so forth. But I realized that, behind every piece of paper was a human being. And I remember thinking about my dear mum, who worked in the fashion industry. And I kept reminding myself that should my mum ever leave Stutterford's, that someone who's processing a withdrawal benefit or a death benefit or a retirement benefit would give due care and attention so that my mum gets what is due to her. And I think that just kept me alert to the fact that behind every paper, behind every PC, there's a human being who's unsuspecting and trusting that their hard-earned salaries and savings is being looked after properly. Now, having said that, Michael, when I think back, many of our people in those days didn't even know they were saving, didn't even know there was compulsory saving. All they were interested was the take-home pay. So if you look at, I don't know what the latest number is, but 80 billion comes to mind where it's unclaimed benefits.
Unclaimed benefits, yeah.
And those are people, migrant workers especially, people that didn't know that their savings and money due to them as families. So, as things progressed and as I was developing in this amazing company, Old Mutual, I then realized a lot more. But what really attracted me was how vast this industry is. I then realized that there's so many laws that we have to be aware of, not know it all, but be aware of. So it spreads across many laws in order to have a holistic solution, have a holistic understanding of how it all fits in.
And that's why the job of a trustee is actually one that, from my perspective, should almost be professionalized because of the amount of time, because of the amount of effort, the laws that one has to be kept abreast of. And we've seen changes, obviously, from the defined contribution era that you grew up into defined contribution. And the fact being that when we moved from DB to DC, it was all about the company really guaranteeing what you would get, to an era now where it's retirement saver, you're effectively on your own. So within that system, the role of the trustee is so much more critical and vital. And, one of the biggest changes we've seen is the default regulations, which were introduced in March last year. David McCarthy, eventually, they were called the McCarthy reforms, but he shrugged his shoulders and said this is moving too slowly. There were issues with the unions pushing back around compulsory preservation and all kinds of issues, but we've got a watered-down version of them, the defaults in March last year. Just remind us about the aim of these defaults and what they're trying to correct within the system.
Just to give some context to what you were saying earlier on about the responsibilities of trustees and how onerous it is, and you mentioned professional trustees. I just want to remind the listeners that, in the 80s, guys fought hard to have the Pension Funds Act amended, to allow for member-elected trustees. Because in those days, trustees were basically employer appointed and they controlled the purse. They controlled everything. So when we got the act amended, it meant that members could be elected to be trustees. Now when people talk of professional trustees, I agree because it's vast. It requires due attention, but you don't have to be an expert. I'm very fearful of letting people out of that experience of being on a board, of being upskilled, of bringing integrity and leadership and trust by members, by the masses. So, having said that, there's certainly a place for professionalism, definitely, but we can't ignore members. We can't ignore upskilling members to be able to ask questions and see how things work in these fancy offices. Coming back to your question, National Treasury has embarked on a number of very good changes for very good reason. And in a nutshell, it's all about preserving your compulsory savings for retirement. And the thinking behind that is not only not to have a burden on the state, but for our parents and elderly that are going to stop generating an income to retire or stop generating an income in dignity, not having to depend on children, churches, welfare. That's the whole idea. Now, if one considers where we are and what is expected this year, given what happened last year, it's very difficult for people to think of saving when their bellies need some food. Children need food, medication, traveling. So saving is not a big issue, right? For many people, the masses. So National Treasury rightfully said, hold on, we need to try and find ways of encouraging, not making it compulsory, because there's a lot of pushback, as you rightly pointed out, from Labour. NEDLAC hasn't agreed to many things for good reason. So National Treasury came up with many, many great initiatives with the idea of, one, not having a burden on the state, people retiring. But there's a very important point, Michael, and that is National Treasury realizes that South Africa, although extremely well-regulated, I mean, we've got a great, well-regulated industry, make no mistake, but our fees are very, very high. And National Treasury is saying, hold on guys, service providers out there, you are too expensive. In fact, we could start competing with you. So what David McCarthy and team came up with is ways of saying, if you guys don't change and review your high fees, you're going to be forced to. And here are some of the things that we as policymakers are starting to think about. So for me, the takeout from all these things is the dignity, less burden on our welfare state, which has become so, for good reason. And then, of course, to start competing with guys that are just generating a lot of fees.
And the fees is a real bugbear for me, because very often, and back to your earlier point, you're dealing with individuals who don't know the difference between pensionable salary and remuneration, and why targeting a net replacement ratio of 75%, if you're using the wrong figure, is not going to get you to your final destination of retiring comfortably. So there's this asymmetry of information in the industry that has always existed. Investment consultants really act as intermediaries between the pension funds and the asset managers here. What role do you see them playing? Because as such, their geography, their relational geography in the investment process gives them something of a conflicted role. So that's something that trustees need to be really acutely aware of.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But it doesn't only apply to asset consultants. It applies to these big insurance companies who provide all services. So you could have the one-stop shop who's providing you with risk benefits, asset consultants, and administration. So there is conflict, but conflict can be managed. So boards of trustees must be alert to that. As you rightfully pointed out, Michael, there's been this significant move to define contribution. So the need for consultants, I argue, is not that, it's not as it was when we had defined benefits. Here you have a sort of off-the-shelf type of product. So it's like a savings account, The employer agrees on what the contribution rates are. There's not much in terms of benefit structure. Risk benefits, your disability and group life, there's not much to really put in there because it's subject to affordability. So coming back to investment consultants, there's a need for them. But then again, National Treasury said, hold on guys, if you take Warren Buffett, he says, hey man, retirement funds, you should be in passive investing.
Which are low cost.
Exactly. So if we move there, and there's a great debate about that, and both sides have good arguments, but if you start moving that way, then the need for consultants and in-betweeners and fees that are just added upon fees can be taken away. But one's got to be mindful about job loss, skills loss, so it's something that has to be managed very, very carefully. But the time's going to come, Michael, where there's going to be serious consolidation, where you're going to have a few accredited retirement funds, where criteria is fees, absolutely, good governance, things like that.
And on that point, so what do you see driving that consolidation? We obviously see the rise of umbrella funds as one of those big drivers. What do you see as the main driver?
Is that, and then of course the fact that there are funds, many funds, smaller funds, that are by nature of their size are not cost effective. Okay, and then of course what used to be the Financial Services Board, which is now the Financial
Sector Conduct Authority. Yeah.
They said at last count they've got 1,300 self-standing funds, which is reduced from thousands. So it also assists with their backlogs, with them reviewing and checking and so forth. So if you have bigger funds who are accredited, then economies of scale can come in. But you mentioned umbrella funds. I'm on record publicly speaking, newspapers, at seminars and whatever, where there's a big debate. Because umbrella funds are the brainchild of service providers, and they push in hard. Why? It's business. So, as an example now, we're talking of, and I boast about it, even when I go out of the country, about how great our regulations are and so forth and so forth. But the Pension Funds Act as it stands now doesn't talk about umbrella funds. And for years, our regulators have been, and they're aware and they're working on it, it doesn't cover umbrella funds. So there's a lot of loopholes.
Yeah, I was going to come through to that with regards to the defaults as well, because if one has a look at how those are handled in the default regulations, there is still a lot of uncertainty with regards to the way the regulations are applied to umbrella funds. Will they be applied to umbrella funds at fund level or at participating in employer level? How can an umbrella fund set defaults that will be suitable for all participating employers and for all members within those groups? Lots of unresolved issues, although the spirit is understandably good with good intention.
Yeah.
In practice, it becomes something a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. So just to summarize, the Pension Funds Act applies to umbrella funds as well, like it does to your pension funds, your provident funds. Retirement annuities fall under that, but they significantly different because it's individuals as the fund and the company. So umbrella funds have to have default regulations as part of their rules and their offering. It's not at participating employer level, it's certainly at fund level. However, members and participating employers will be given options. Michael, what's very important to understand about default regulations that came about 1st of March last year is it's not compulsory. It is just another option to your living annuities that the big insurers offer, your traditional type of pension policies and so. So it's the start of saying, guys, we're introducing competition with the sole idea of making it more understandable. That's very important because we have language differences, we have literacy differences and scales and so forth. But a member is not obliged, or it's not compulsory that a member of a fund must go into that default regulation.
A very important point.
Very
there.
important.
Overall, Bashka, and unfortunately the time has flown today.
That is unfortunate.
Do you believe the industry is, and very broadly speaking here, serving members? And the stats tell us that according to the Alex Forbes member survey, only 6% of South Africans are retiring with enough. There's a whole host of reasons behind that. You mentioned it. How do you save when you've got tummies to feed, you've got children to put through school? But there is also a point to be made that the industry perhaps isn't doing enough to communicate and educate members. Do you think that the industry is serving members effectively now?
I strongly believe, being in this, a lot of people started calling me an elder in the industry, and that's not because of my age. But there's been significant dynamic changes in this industry. Dynamic, fantastic. It was really fantastic to be part of it. However, asking the industry is a valid question. However, the employer has a very, very important role to play. Remember, the employer is a critical stakeholder. The employer decides on retirement ages, contribution rates, salary increases, and they're all linked. So human resources have a role to play, trustees have a role to play, service providers have a role to play. But, Michael, members have a role to play. So it doesn't make sense to just, isolate one aspect of this industry. And that's what I mentioned earlier on, how vast this industry is.
I get that, Bashka. Members should be doing more. You take responsibility for your own life. Employees and employers have this relationship. Maybe employers need to be a little bit more paternalistic.
Absolutely.
But I would that's what you're arguing for. If employers need to have a role in HR, you need to be taking a bit more ownership and oversight over your employees' decisions. Why are they taking 7.5% contribution rates when the stats say you've got to be at 15% from a certain age if you want to retire with enough?
Yeah, but
and we hate the word paternalism because it harks back to a different era.
Yes.
But in the DC age, what we have currently is delivering outcomes of 6% of South Africans have enough to retire at the end of it. All the role players have an area that they can improve on. What is the area that the industry can improve on?
I think certainly fees, because in a defined contribution environment, the less the expenses are, the more the retirement savings. So that's where they can. Communication, better, good governance, more transparency. So there's a whole list of it. But when one talks about replacement ratio, my argument with actuaries, and it's always been, is guys, nice numbers, great presentation. But where's the employer in the equation? Now my comrades in the labor will admire me even more and saying, increase the salary, you get increased savings. Increase the salary, you get better risk benefits. Increase the contribution rates, you get more savings. So that's the aspect that employers come in. Employers also have a duty to inform, to educate, not make decisions. That's still the member who's always encouraged to talk to accredited financial advisors. Trustees don't do that. Employers are not accredited to do that. So can you see how it's not as easy? So standing in front of, at a conference and putting out these numbers and these great slides, it's not part of it. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah, and it speaks of collaboration. This was said to be the year of collaboration in Davos, so hopefully we'll see a lot more collaboration in the retirement industry to start improving that abysmal number of 6% that seems to barely budge year in, year
out. It's more like
out.
3%, my brother.
There we go. Bashka, it's been a real pleasure getting to share your insights into the industry in which you rightfully said you are considered one of the elders. Thank you for your time.
And to you and Tessic FM, excellent for having shows like this. Thank you, and I hope it reaches out to my people on the ground, not just the experts.
That was Bashka Lachman, ex-Vice President of the Institute of Retirement Funds, sharing his thoughts here on The View from the C-Suite. Make up your own mind, I guess. That's a wrap for this week. Master Yoda reminds us, do or do not, there is no try. Thanks to producer Andres Mashlangu and sound engineers Mataba Taba Rodebe, Mawanda Lobe. The Jazz Lounge with Rod Miller up next in Cape Town, and in Gauteng, Carolyn Steyn has a double bill of winding down into a rainy Gauteng weekend. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week. Good night.